The auditorium was buzzing long before the cameras rolled. Thousands of voices blended into one restless hum, hopeful contestants whispering prayers backstage, audience members clutching popcorn and expectations, judges flipping through mental checklists of what they had already seen 100 times before. Talent, flash confidence, that was what usually walked onto this stage, and then, he did. A man stepped out from behind the curtain, and something about him immediately felt different. He didn't stride. He didn't wave. He didn't pause for applause. He simply walked, carefully, quietly, like someone who didn't want to take up more space than necessary. He wore a faded blue button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to show forearms marked by years of work. His jeans were clean but old, the kind that told stories of ladders climbed and floors scrubbed. His shoes were scuffed at the toes, as if they had carried him far but never anywhere glamorous. The giant AGT logo loomed behind him, glowing, powerful, almost overwhelming compared to the small figure standing beneath it. The audience clapped politely. Some smiled, some whispered, "Who's this guy? Is he lost? Is this another joke audition?" One judge leaned back, eyebrows raised. Another tapped a pen, already halfway bored. They had seen it all, or so they thought. The man reached the center of the stage and stopped. For a moment he didn't speak. He looked out over the sea of faces, blinking against the brightness of the lights. The crowd went quiet, sensing something fragile in the pause. Finally he leaned toward the microphone. "My name is Daniel Carter," he said. His voice wasn't booming. It didn't demand attention, but it earned it. "I'm 52 years old," he continued, offering a gentle smile, "and I work nights as a janitor at a public high school in Ohio." A few people nodded politely, others looked confused. A janitor, on this stage? One judge tilted her head. "Daniel," she said kindly, "that's not a job we hear very often here. What made you decide to audition for America's Got Talent?" Daniel took a breath, a deep one, the kind people take when they're about to say something real. "I almost didn't come," he admitted. "I filled out the application 3 times and tore it up every time." A soft chuckle rippled through the audience. "But my daughter," he added, "she said something that stuck with me. She said, 'Dad, you've spent your whole life showing up for other people. Maybe it's okay to let the world see you for once.'" Something shifted in the room. The judges leaned forward now. Daniel clasped his hands together, steadying them. "I'm not famous. I don't have a big story people usually clap for. I just try to do right by folks when I can." The camera caught his eyes, clear, honest, carrying a quiet weight. "I've watched this show for years," he went on. "I've seen people chase dreams here, and I realized sometimes the biggest dream isn't about being seen." A judge asked softly, "Then what is it about, Daniel?" Daniel smiled again, but this time it trembled just a little. "It's about giving something back," he said. The words hung in the air, not dramatic, not rehearsed, just true. Around the auditorium, people sat a little straighter. Phones that had been raised casually now held still. A woman in the front row pressed her hand to her chest without realizing she'd done it. Daniel looked down for a moment, gathering himself, then back up. "I've walked these same hallways every night for 2 decades, he said. "I've cleaned classrooms after kids stayed late studying for exams they were scared to fail. I've wiped chalkboards where teachers wrote lessons they hoped would matter." His voice grew warmer as he spoke, as if memory itself was guiding him. "I've found lost notebooks and returned them. I've fixed broken chairs so no one would fall, and most nights nobody noticed, and that was okay." The judges were silent now, no interruptions, no jokes. Daniel nodded once, as if reassuring himself. "I don't believe we're measured by how loud our lives are," he said. "I think we're measured by how many people feel a little less alone because we were there." A hush fell over the room, deep and complete. Even the lights seemed softer somehow. Daniel stood there, small against the massive stage, yet somehow taller than the moment itself. "And that," he finished gently, "is why I'm here." No applause came right away. Instead, there was something better, stillness, the kind that only happens when thousands of strangers realize, all at once, that they're listening to something that matters. And in that silence, It became clear this simple man hadn't walked onto the AGT stage to impress. He had walked on to remind everyone what it means to be human. The silence after Daniel's words lingered longer than anyone expected. One of the judges cleared his throat, almost as if he needed permission to speak again. "Daniel," he said gently, "you talk about showing up for others. Can you tell us what that looks like in your life?" Daniel nodded, though his eyes briefly dropped to the stage floor, as if the answer lived somewhere heavy inside him. "I'll try," he said. "I'm not very good at talking about myself." That earned a soft, understanding laugh from the audience. Daniel took another breath. "I grew up in a town most people drive through without noticing. My dad worked 2 jobs. My mom stretched meals so thin you could see the plate through them. But every Sunday, no matter how tired we were, my mom made an extra pot of soup." He smiled at the memory. She said, "You never know who might need it." The judges listened completely still. "We didn't have much," Daniel continued, "but my parents taught me something early. Kindness doesn't require extra money. It just requires attention." He paused, eyes shining now. "I married my high school sweetheart, Emily. She laughed at my bad jokes and believed in me when I didn't know what I was good for yet. We dreamed small dreams, raising a family, owning a little house with a porch that squeaked." A quiet chuckle passed through the crowd. Daniel's voice softened. "Life didn't go the way we planned." The words landed gently but firmly. "Emily got sick when our daughter, Lily, was only 9. It happened fast. One year we were arguing about paint colors for the kitchen, and the next year I was holding her hand in a hospital room, pretending not to be afraid. The room grew heavy. I told her I'd be okay," Daniel said. "I told her Lily would be okay. I told her not to worry." His hands tightened together. She smiled and said, "You always take care of everyone. Don't forget to let someone take care of you too." Daniel swallowed. She passed away 2 weeks later. There were sniffles now. Someone quietly wiped their eyes. "I took the night shift at the school because it paid a little extra," Daniel said. "It meant I could be home when Lily got back from class. It meant I could walk her to the bus, help with homework, be there." He nodded to himself. That mattered. The judges exchanged looks, no longer judges but listeners. Some nights were lonely, Daniel admitted. The halls felt longer, the echo louder, but something strange happened. He looked up. "I started noticing people." He described the teenage boy who practiced trumpet alone in the band room every night because his parents worked late. The young teacher who stayed after hours, crying quietly over student loans and self-doubt. The janitor before him, an older man who taught Daniel how to fix things with patience instead of force. "I learned their names," Daniel said. "I learned their stories, and I realize everyone is carrying something heavy. You just don't always see it." Daniel smiled softly. "So I did what I could. I left encouraging notes, fixed things before anyone asked. Sometimes I'd just listen." One judge leaned forward. "And you never thought of that as something special?" Daniel shook his head. "No." He said simply, "I thought of it as being human." The audience exhaled together. Daniel shifted his weight, growing more serious. "Last winter," he continued, "there was a family in my town, the Harrisons. House fire, lost everything, 3 kids, no warning." A murmur rippled through the room. "I passed their place every day on my way to work," Daniel said. "Saw the blackened windows, the toys in the yard covered in ash, and every night I went home to my roof, my walls, my heater." His voice cracked. "Not much, but enough. I kept thinking, why do I get to be warm when they don't?" The judges were visibly emotional now. "I started saving," Daniel said, "a few dollars here, a few there. I skipped repairs, skipped new clothes, told myself it wasn't much, but maybe it could help." He looked out at the crowd, eyes earnest. "I didn't do it because I'm brave," he said. "I did it because I couldn't sleep otherwise." The room was silent again. One judge whispered, "Daniel, why bring this here?" Daniel smiled, small, humble. "Because this stage reaches millions," he said, "and if one person watching decides to care a little more tomorrow, then everything I've lived through means something bigger. The camera zoomed in as he finished. I'm just a man who learned that love doesn't disappear when someone you love is gone. It changes shape. It becomes something you give away. By the time he stopped speaking, the audience wasn't just listening anymore. They were feeling, and though Daniel hadn't sung a single note yet, everyone in that room already knew they were witnessing something rare. A life lived quietly, finally being heard. For a brief moment after Daniel finished speaking, no one moved. Not the judges, not the audience, not even Daniel himself. It was as if the room needed time to catch up with what it had just heard. Finally, the host stepped forward, voice gentle. Daniel, whenever you're ready, you can begin your performance. Daniel nodded, but instead of turning toward the band or signaling the music, he lifted one hand slightly. Before I do, he said, there's something I need to take care of. A ripple of curiosity moved through the audience. Daniel reached into the front pocket of his shirt. Not hurried, not dramatic, just careful. He pulled out a small, worn envelope. The edges were soft, bent from being carried too long. The flap had been opened and resealed more than once, as if the decision inside had been argued with many times. He held it up, not high, not for show, just enough for the judges to see. This, Daniel said quietly, is everything I've saved this past year. The judges froze. One of them blinked. Saved for what? Daniel smiled faintly. Originally, for my house. My roof leaks. Been meaning to fix it before another winter hits. A low murmur passed through the crowd, but, Daniel continued, every time I looked at that envelope, I kept seeing the Harrison kids, sleeping on couches, wearing donated coats that didn't quite fit. He paused, steadying his breath. I kept hearing my mom's voice, you never know who might need it. Daniel took a step forward and extended the envelope toward the host. I want this to go to them, he said. Every dollar. Gasps echoed across the auditorium. A judge leaned forward sharply. Daniel, are you sure? That's a lot to give up. Daniel nodded. I know. And what about you? Another judge asked. What happens when it rains? Daniel chuckled softly. I'll put a bucket down. I've done it before. The audience didn't laugh this time. They were too busy standing. Row by row, people rose to their feet, not clapping yet, not cheering. Just standing, as if instinctively honoring something sacred. The camera cut to faces streaked with tears. A young man wiped his cheeks with his sleeve. An older woman clasped her hands together as if in prayer. The host accepted the envelope carefully, like it might break if handled wrong. This is extraordinary, he said, voice thick. Daniel shook his head. It's just money, he said. What matters is what it does. The judges were silent again, visibly shaken. One finally spoke. Daniel, you came here with no guarantee of anything, no prize, no promise. Why give it away now? Daniel looked out into the crowd, at strangers who suddenly felt like neighbors, because generosity shouldn't wait for applause. He said, if I waited to see if I won, then it wouldn't really be a gift. Something broke open in the room at that moment, not sadness, something deeper, recognition. Daniel stepped back toward the microphone, hands now empty, shoulders lighter. I didn't come here hoping to be famous, he said. I came hoping to be useful. The host nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Daniel, he finally said, whenever you're ready. Daniel closed his eyes. The stage lights dimmed slightly, bathing him in a softer glow. The room fell so quiet you could hear someone breathe. Then Daniel began to sing. No backing track at first, just his voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flawless, but it carried something no training could teach. Truth. Each note trembled, not from fear but from feeling, from years of holding things in, from loving and losing and choosing kindness anyway. When the music swelled in behind him, it didn't overpower his voice. It lifted it, like hands beneath someone who's fallen. He sang about home, about holding on, about believing that even broken things can shelter love. The judges stared, unmoving. One pressed her hand to her mouth. Another wiped his eyes openly, no longer caring about the cameras. Halfway through the song, the audience was crying, not loudly, not dramatically, but together, united by a single man's quiet courage. Daniel sang the final note and let it hang. He didn't rush. He let the silence speak, and in that silence, something extraordinary happened. One judge stood up. Then another, then all of them. The crowd erupted, not in screams, but in thunderous applause that felt less like celebration and more like gratitude. Daniel opened his eyes, startled, overwhelmed. Before he could process what was happening, one judge leaned forward and said softly, "Daniel, you didn't just sing a song." She pressed the button, the golden buzzer. Gold confetti exploded from above, raining down like light itself, had decided to applaud. Daniel dropped to his knees, not in shock, not in disbelief, but in humility. He covered his face, shoulders shaking, as the world stood for him, and in that moment, everyone understood this wasn't about talent alone. It was about a simple man who gave without asking, and showed millions that compassion is the most powerful performance of all. Gold still drifted through the air like a slow, glowing snowfall. It clung to Daniel's shoulders, settled into the creases of his worn shirt, and shimmered against the stage floor. For a moment he remained on his knees, hands pressed together, head bowed, not because he was overwhelmed by victory, but because he didn't know how to receive something this big. The applause thundered on, rolling through the auditorium like waves that refused to stop breaking. "Daniel, Daniel," voices began chanting, spontaneous and sincere. He finally stood, blinking through tears, confetti sticking to his eyelashes. He looked smaller somehow, like a man who had stepped into a storm of love without an umbrella. One of the judges stepped forward, microphone trembling in her hand. "Daniel," she said, voice thick with emotion, "in all my years on this stage, I don't think I've ever seen something like that." Daniel shook his head gently. "I didn't mean to, I know," she interrupted softly. "That's what makes it unforgettable." The crowd erupted again. The host joined them on stage, placing a supportive hand on Daniel's back. "America just watched you give away your safety," he said. "How does it feel to stand here now?" Daniel looked out at the sea of faces, some smiling, some crying, some holding hands with strangers. He took his time before answering. "It feels like I'm not alone anymore," he said quietly. Something in that sentence hit harder than any note he'd sung. Backstage, producers rushed around, whispering urgently. Phones buzzed, messages flew. Something was happening beyond the stage, beyond the cameras, that no one had planned. The judges conferred briefly. Then one of them turned back to Daniel. "You mentioned your roof," he said. "You mentioned putting buckets down when it rains." Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir." The judge smiled, slow and knowing. "Well," he said, "I don't think you'll need those buckets any more." The crowd leaned in, because right now, the judge continued, people all over this country are watching you, and they're responding. The big screen behind Daniel flickered to life. Social media feeds scrolled rapidly. "Find Daniel Carter, let's help him. This man restored my faith in humanity. Kindness like this deserves kindness back." Gasps filled the room. The host stepped forward again. Within minutes, he said, "Viewers have pledged to cover your roof repairs, your heating, and more." Daniel's hands flew to his mouth. "No, no, you don't have to," he started. The host smiled gently. "Daniel, you gave freely. Let the world do the same." Tears streamed down Daniel's face now, unchecked and honest. Then the screen changed again. A photo appeared. 3 children standing in front of a temporary shelter, wrapped in donated coats. "The Harrison family," the host spoke softly. "Earlier today, we reached out to the family you mentioned." Daniel's breath caught. "They're watching right now." The camera cut to a video feed. Mrs. Harrison stood in a small living room, one arm around her youngest child. Her eyes were red, her smile unsteady but real. "Daniel," she said, voice trembling, "we don't know how to thank you." The children waved shyly. "You didn't just give us money," she continued. "You gave us hope. You made us feel seen." Daniel sank onto the stage steps, overwhelmed. "I just wanted you to be warm," he whispered. Mrs. Harrison nodded. "Tonight, we are." The audience was openly crying now. One judge wiped her face and said, This is why this show exists." The applause returned, louder than before. Not for talent, not for spectacle, but for something deeply human. Later that night, backstage, Daniel sat alone for a moment in a quiet hallway. The noise felt far away now. He stared at his hands, hands that had scrubbed floors, fixed desks, held his daughter through nightmares. A producer approached him gently. "Daniel," she said, "you've changed lives tonight." He looked up, surprised. "I didn't mean to," she smiled. "The best people never do." Daniel thought of Emily, of her smile, of the promise he'd made to take care of others, and maybe, finally, to let someone take care of him. When he returned to the stage for one final moment, the audience rose again. He spoke into the microphone, voice steady now. "I used to think kindness was invisible," he said. "Something you did in the dark, expecting nothing back." He paused. "Tonight I learned something else. The room was silent. Kindness is never wasted. Daniel said, it just waits, until it finds its way home." The lights dimmed, the crowd stood, clapping until their hands ached. And somewhere in that applause, a simple man realized the world had been listening all along. The stage lights slowly dimmed, but the moment refused to fade. Even as the audience filed out, people moved differently, quieter, softer, like they had just walked out of a church or a memory they didn't want to disturb. Strangers hugged, some wiped their eyes in silence. Others smiled at one another, as if sharing a secret they'd never forget. Daniel stood backstage, holding a paper cup of water with both hands, trying to steady himself. The gold confetti was gone now, swept away like a dream, but the feeling remained, heavy and warm in his chest. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. A producer approached. "Daniel," she said gently, "your daughter is here." He looked up, startled. "Lily." Before he could stand, she was already their arms wrapped around him, holding him like she used to when she was small and afraid of thunderstorms. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Mom would be too. Daniel closed his eyes. For a long moment he didn't speak. He didn't need to. That night, clips of Daniel's audition spread across the world. But people didn't share it because of the singing. They shared it because of him. Teachers played it for their classrooms. Pastors referenced it in sermons. Parents showed it to their children and said, This is what matters." People didn't ask, how good was his voice. They asked, how good was his heart. Back home in Ohio, something remarkable happened. The high school halls Daniel had cleaned for decades buzzed with excitement. Students left handwritten notes taped to lockers. "Thank you for always saying good luck before my exams. I never knew your story. I'm glad I do now. You mattered before TV, but now the world knows." The roof on Daniel's house was repaired within a week, the heater replaced, the walls insulated. And when Daniel tried to refuse, people smiled and said the same thing over and over, "Let us show up for you." But what mattered most to him wasn't the repairs, it was the letters, hundreds of them. From people he would never meet. A nurse in Texas wrote, "I stayed late with a patient tonight because of you." A teenager in California said, "I apologized to my dad after watching your story." A man in New York confessed, "I thought kindness didn't matter anymore. I was wrong." Daniel read every single one. Sometimes late at night he sat at his kitchen table, the same one Emily had picked out years ago, and read them aloud, like prayers. One evening Lily watched him quietly and asked, "Dad, did you ever think your life would matter like this?" Daniel smiled. "I always thought it mattered," he said. "I just didn't think anyone was watching." Months later, Daniel returned to the AGT stage, not as a contestant, but as a guest. He wore the same simple clothes, the same humble smile, but something had changed. He stood a little taller now, not from pride, but from peace. When the host asked what he'd learned since that night, Daniel paused. "I learned that kindness is contagious," he said. "You don't have to be famous to start it. You just have to be willing." He looked out at the crowd. "And I learned something else," he added. "There are millions of simple people out there doing quiet good every day. I didn't walk onto that stage alone. I walked in carrying all of them with me." The audience stood, not because they were told to, but because their hearts recognized truth. As the lights dimmed one final time, Daniel stepped off the stage, not into fame, but back into life. He still worked nights. He still cleaned hallways, he still fixed what was broken when no one was looking. But now, when he walked those halls, something followed him, hope, and somewhere, a child slept warmer, a family felt seen. A stranger chose kindness instead of indifference, all because a simple man once stepped onto a stage and reminded the world who it could be